I just met you, and this is crazy. Your house is mine now, 'cause I'm Israeli. It's funny, right? It's funny. It's not funny. 4 generations, 5 generations, 6 generations, a million people dead, displaced in an even larger number. Palestinian people have far more genetic connection to ancient Hebrew ancestry than uh, than the European people that are passed off as of uh, uh, he, the Hebrew inheritors. This it's a conspiracy theory. It's a Khazarian theory. It's probably mostly to be disregarded, right? But there's a kernel of truth to that, right? Because you don't have to really. You can just ignore those narratives. Just look at ancestral DNA analysis and see that the actual Palestinian people that are being mass murdered are the only real victims of anti-Semitic hate crimes of recent decades, if for no other reason than they're the only real Semitic people in these equations. The it's not even close, right? It's like you could just pick a random person, and they would have almost as much legitimate Middle Eastern ancestry as most of these European people passed off as ancient Hebrews. And compare that to people actually indigenous to the region, people actually from the Levant, have actual Palestinians, and the analysis says that they have 96%, 98% ancient Hebrew ancestry. That's why it's not legal in the so-called state of Israel in a lot of contexts uh, to um, to have these ancestral DNA analyses, because this is a settler colony bringing in European people under a flimsy pretext of religious and ancestral legitimacy, and that kind of farce would be bad in almost any circumstance. Uh, just an insane right-wing ethno state would be bad in almost any circumstance when you have mass murder that it's all predicated on. It turns into a real horror. And I think of this woman, an actress, a nice little old lady named Miriam Margolyes, who's said on many occasions that in the course of the 20th century, Jewish people went from people who tended to have ardent socialistic feelings, if not militant socialistic feelings, to a higher degree than other light-skinned people, perhaps. Um, Other European descended people tending to have, to being as bad or worse as any group. Um, and there's this guy, what's his name? Bezalel Smoltrik, Beelzebub Schmedrick. Terrible person. He deserves to be called Beelzebub Schmendrick. and but who were his ancestors? Well, the recent ancestors weren't too much better, but they weren't Beelzebub. And at some point, most of these people who are now just um, frothing at the mouth, right? If you're not invested in what's being sold here and legitimizing the settler colony, and if you're a space alien looking at the ideology of Benjamin Netanyahu, um, it would be incoherent, right? It's not even he doesn't even really aspire to really have a coherent worldview. It's just this flimsy pretext for theft and entitlement. And but you to round up these 50 worst people, from Beelzebub to Satan Yahoo, and most of them had an ancestor who would have been a proud socialist. And this is something that Ms. Margulies doesn't say enough, which is, or people of this kind of, God, God love her, Miss Margulies, don't say enough of this, which is, for example, at the end of the Second World War, a lot of such people, these more socialistically inclined Jewish people, were not too happy with what had happened, and rightly so. And considering what their next move might be, and rightly so, they wanted to come to the United States. It's far away from all this mess. There's not really, it doesn't seem to be a lot of the specific kind of pogrom going on there. Other pogroms affecting other people, of course. Um, and what did the U.S. leadership, how did they respond to this? Well, the U.S. leadership has always been more or less uniformly fascistic, going back centuries before we could formally call things fascistic. There was still those hardline tendencies. Um, and in the 20th century, it had gotten quite bad. And by 1945, people hadn't recognized that something like Project Paperclip was turning the United States into something more like a Nazi project. Um, uh, but um, but the leadership was already in place. So the fascist United States says of these socialistic Jews, we don't want these people here, and this already atrocities ongoing at this time, at and around this time. So the rejection of these people on that basis was tantamount to murder. Um, um, and but fast forward a few decades, fast forward many 8 decades since, what's been the result of this? It's you say, well, that's kind of a limited example, but the influence of the fascist United States on the fascist Israeli project, so called, is not limited. It's overarching. It's its defining feature. Um, um, there's nothing more defining than this military client relationship, the U.S. involvement and steering, and it's not a one-way street, but many people will tend to overstate this. Like, there's no case to be made that Israel is funding the United States or really steering the United States. The influence is far more limited there. No one in their right mind would say that the United States is the military client state of Israel. That doesn't even make sense, right? But most of the people, just with the Khazarian narrative, people who engage with that sort of thing, they're kind of using more fuzzy logic there, and that is the worst fascist denial, right? Really, it is to say that all of this lays at the feet of Israel when the fascist United States is really the puppet master behind the whole thing. It's sad that uh, um, modern Jewry has become more fascistic than socialistic by quite a margin, I think. Um, but you don't really get to say that. This is a problem with so much of these conversations, that they really are centering a Eurocentric paradigm. You don't really get to say that, right? Because the conversation really is and must be about uh, the victims in our time, not of the Wailing Wall, a thing that may or may not have happened, things that are basically lost to history and thus little more than mythology, uh, um, but of people who are being blown to bits right now. And uh, there's many bourgeois, violent, militaristic horrors in this world among the West, the North Atlantic powers. The UK's influence on turning Israel into an apartheid, fascistic genocidal state. It should not be um, understated. It's a massive influence there, but the United States has really been the thing shaping and driving this more than any other thing. And it, what I said before, it's the same thing about Israel. Like every Israeli politician, if you get them to be honest, would say, this whole thing, whole house of cards would have collapsed decades ago were it not for the United States. It's pretty easy when you're looking at almost anything that's occurred from 1970s, 1967 on. Um, um, and a man is just reelected in a non-consecutive second presidential term. Um, Donald Trump um, of the United States was a person responsible for a real mask-off moment there. Right? There was no long before that. These just kind of dog shit neoliberal presidents would have the pretense of sort of, oh, we really do want to help. Really do want to figure out what a two-state solution would look like. We can't just have land back, but we really do want to help. But of course, it didn't want to help. It's just like this false figurehead um, um, laundering the bad reputation of the actual military fascists in charge. Um, but with Donald Trump, it was just no. This is our little puppet. It's no joke. No, no, no need to lie about that anymore. And is that a major cause of the Israelis having the audacity to do this false flag thing where they knew that October 7th was going to happen, and they intentionally killed hundreds of their own people to then just have the whole thing lost in the fog of war so they could have this now 15-month, 14-month campaign of mass murder to try and liquidate the entire population of occupied Palestine. Uh, I, the U.S. getting constantly worse in almost every area has many downstream effects on the rest of the world and things like this. The U.S. is right now funding 4 major proxy wars in this region, if you include Palestine, which can hardly be called a proxy war. Uh, you know, um, this, and you'd say, well, it's limited to this region, right? Historically, it's not even been focused on that region. A quarter of all Korean people were firebombed to death in the decade of the 1950s, thereabouts, for no reason at all. Um, uh, Not even in the fog of a proxy war, and not even in the way that equal or even slightly larger percentage of Japanese people were murdered. Civilians were murdered because fascism. Okay, shouldn't be murdering civilians under any circumstance, but that was more of a reason. But there was no reason to kill all of these Koreans. No reason at all. They were saving them from communism. You're killing a substantial portion of these bloodlines to save them. Right? That's the actions of insane people. Right? You look at the people who are characterized in the English common parlance as bad in these ways, like the Spanish Inquisition. I think they killed a couple of people. You killed millions of people, destroying entire bloodlines. And you'd say, oh, well, the United States' involvement in the Middle East is bad, and Japan is bad, Korea is bad, but surely it doesn't go much beyond that. No, you cannot point to a continent of origin which doesn't have multiple countries that have been depopulated at high percentage points in this way. You can't. All of Southeast Asia except for the smallest of countries, have been depopulated in that way by the fascist United States. When you look at problems like um, Israeli fascism, um, or the problems of the Jewish person's descent into fascism, which is should not be overstated because it would just more or less hit this same benchmark as other European people. They used to be less evil, so it seems more dramatic that they're now so evil. But really, they're just kind of on par with the rest of European people at this point. European descendant people, the United States being the worst. Um, uh, uh, when you focus on this one limited theater, you're looking at this Plato's cave kind of problem by not attributing to the fascist United States all of these horrors. And I um, am a cybernetic communist, so I often do these live streams where I talk about this in terms of a people's AI takeoff and the building of a superintelligence like um, that could be built using open source large language model AI agents into an array that would be a work group, which at a certain scale would be a dramatic workforce multiplier that could transform the industrial bases in the way that we need to transform them absolutely within the next few years to stop capitalism's climate apocalypse from bringing about the destruction of all humankind, or most of humankind, and um, um, but the the problems of U.S. Fascism can also be quite reasonably looked at through this lens of U.S. techno-fascism. I like to give the example of a formation that could have brought about a people's AI takeoff effects, and I believe absolutely would have brought about people's superintelligence, the building of a technological planned economy in Chile from approximately 1971 to 1973 by not just Salvador Allende, but many gifted cyberneticians from Chile, and Stafford Beer, a cybernetician who was not a avowed Marxist-Leninist, not very favorably inclined to Marxist-Leninist thought as Allende was, but who nevertheless wanted to build this thing that could change the world. And a technological planned economy would have done that. It would have inspired the rest of the world to begin to organize these sectors in a more humane and sustainable advanced computing run way. And this was seen as a threat, uh, even though it would have been among the better things that had ever happened to humankind. It was seen as a threat by the fascist West, and particularly the fascist United States, because it could have quite quickly led to sea change in public consensus that would have led to the abolition of private wealth. Had that thing happened, we would be nowhere close to facing extinction from capitalism's climate apocalypse today. But that did not happen because the United States, hoping to prevent the kind of inspiring event like those of 1917 in the USSR that inspired much of the world, if not to embrace state socialism, the lowest stage of state socialism in all of these cases, but many places that were not dedicated to the abolition of private wealth nevertheless built things like a national health service or many safety net features that are more socialistic because the world was it was seen as a timely thing among the people of the world. And there's very little that can be done by fascists when the entire world says, well, we're just not going to be fascist anymore. And but so the United States had to prevent that from happening in the building of technological planned economies. So they killed. They had Pinochet installed and murdered Salvador Allende. He took his own life at the 11th hour, but he was murdered. But not just heads of state that were murdered. Many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people were murdered. School teachers and organizers, people that did not have guns in their hands, just people willing to transform these sectors in the way that they necessarily must. The people willing to do the right thing, as often as not, are murdered by the people who are doing the absolute wrong thing, and those people who are doing absolute wrong thing get to write the history books, so they get to downplay their crimes, and that is more or less about as succinct a distillation of the U.S. identity as you are apt to get as it relates to 20th century and 21st century geopolitics. Um, I will talk now very briefly about this idea of the AI sidekick, a workforce multiplier for yourself in a limited context, if you have the time and resources to dedicate to that. You might be able to improve your life a little bit today by the use of these incipient AI agents, these large language model based research assistants that you can use quite easily, for the most part for free, at the freemium, the low end of the freemium scale. They get better as you're able to pay for them. Unfortunately, these things should be free to all. Um, but Nevertheless, the low end is not so different from the high end in this case. Um, and that, but that individual workforce multiplier means very little, right? Because after 2029, it won't much matter if you lived in a nice condominium and had a nice food to eat, or you lived in a tent on the side of the freeway eating bread and water every day. Wouldn't much matter one of those things from the other, because after 2029, if we do not transform the industrial bases of this US led, highly fascistic, omnicidal, um, um, uh, uh, far right capitalistic arrays of industry, if we do not transform these significantly, we will have reached a point of runaway overheating sometime around 2029. Won't turn into a pumpkin on January 1st, 2029, but in the years to follow and in the decades to follow, this ecosystem, these habitats that we require for our existence, will be collapsing. The planet Earth, for all intents and purposes, will become something more like the planet Venus, a place that does not support multicellular life. Certainly might support some multicellular life, but probably not primate life. That's you. You're a primate. You're not. You were not sent here by God to do majestic and mystical things. You were just a primate fucking around, getting yourself killed because you don't have the insight into your own behavior to stop it. And um, this this thing, the workforce multiplier, then is only meaningful when we talk about it in terms of a mass action, um, a collectivist formation of greater strength and scale than other formations, such as nation states or corporations, have tended to have. Not necessarily because it has more participants than any given nation state, but because the participants are acting in a more real-time, agile way, and having the benefit of this workforce multiplication. Um, and so we can use this thing, which we could term AI agent LLM artificial general intelligence, the lowest level artificial general intelligence, to build what would be effectively the lowest level artificial superintelligence in 2025. If you have 1,000 users in this work group with specially tailored large language models that are open source that can be downloaded to many computers today. Not every person in um, the world has a GPU computer that would uh, more easily host the higher end networked large language model, like the equivalent of Llama 3.2 or better. Not every computer has that, but there are many, many millions of computers, say, in Beijing alone, a city that could be pivotal in this kind of transformation. And so you could estimate that there might be, um, I looked at some, I crunched some numbers before, but the number could be in the low millions of GPU computers just in the greater Beijing area. And for all you or I know, if we are not tech insiders living in Beijing, there could be tens of thousands of people building something like um, an LLM people superintelligence in Beijing as we speak. I hope that's true, but that's really more of a thought experiment than a realistic speculation. Um, um, the um, but it's eminently possible. It's also possible to build a little more sophisticated portal in the form of a progressive web application that is able to use virtual GPUs to nevertheless create this similar edifice of workforce multiplying LLMs working in an array so that a person would not have to have the same level of technical interest or the same level of hardware to participate in much the same formation. Um, and when you have 1,000 such people in this case or some other people super intelligent formation, you have the possibility for doing something a little bit better in a given cityscape, let's say. When you have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, you have something that's able to put pressure on these offending sectors, um, um, which it should be stated, just as the problem of capitalism's climate apocalypse is really the problem of a U.S. enforced set of dictates. Um, the technically, when you look by some studies at the causes of capitalism's climate apocalypse, they would say livestock systems might be 51%, according to some studies, 51% of the cause of human activity leading to this runaway overheating. That's to say, a luxury product of animal products being supplied to the global north, using up 45% of the world's arable land in an unseemly way, that this is 51% of the cause. So slightly edging out the other um, by this one study, slightly edging out the problem of the fossil fuel sectors. But that analysis is almost completely ignoring the role of the fascist United States and its military industrial complex, which is the carbon super polluter without equal in this world. It's the world's worst polluter by far, but it's dramatically worse than that because it's not merely this military industrial abomination super polluting, but its only real job is protecting other super polluters. And it creates this fog of war where these activities look like other things. Oh, this is just an ancient religious conflict. It's not. There's no ancient religious conflict. There is just fascistic capitalist pigs, war criminals, doing horrible things, and then creating other narratives to explain it all away. And so when we say we have to transform these industrial bases in a 4-year time frame, we should clarify that that means the abolition of the Western military industrial complex, most particularly the fascist United States military industrial abomination, the $1 trillion a year super polluting horror. Um, and then the dramatic reduction, the near abolition of other fossil fuel sectors, up to the point where it would not cause supply chain collapses leading to the death of millions. But that could still be 95% of all fossil fuel consumption. China made it illegal to have single-use plastics in 1979, and the global South overall has virtually no impact in fossil fuels compared to the fascist United States, which in the 1990s was said to be the lion's share of all of this consumption. And it's evened out only ever so slightly. And now we would say that these North Atlantic powers represent 80% by many studies, 80% of this impact. That is because of this military fascism, these far-right neoliberal government abominations, other corporate horrors, and the techno-fascism, which has increasingly become the scaffold of all of this. And the so the idea then is that we must build this people's superintelligence, which when it moves from those hundreds of thousands of users, beginning to put pressure, the necessary pressure, on the military-industrial complex of the fascist United States, so that it might begin to crack. When you have millions of users in this people's superintelligent formation, now you have the sufficient pressure to transform these industrial bases. And when you have numbers beyond the mere millions, you see this more humanistic formation, this basis for a humane and sustainable economic system at a global scale, becoming the superstructure itself. By this reasoning, which I think is quite sound, we could say that we could reach a thing like a full communist outcome in our time, in 10 years' time. But do not fall prey to the lie of the techno-fascist, the U.S. technologist for the most part. U.S. tech is just a shortened form of U.S. techno-fascism. That's the best way. Anytime someone says tech to you, tech, 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 so you're talking techno-fascism. Don't let them get away with that sort of thing. Don't accept the lie of this bourgeois AI takeoff, the hyper-capitalistic acceleration of nothing more than the damage of the more 20th century variety done to the environment, accelerating only damage and not benefit, and accelerating other problematic features. I was talking to folks in a group called AI Philosophy, a group where I sometimes post, even though an awful lot of the people there are more techno-fascistic than techno-communistic. But there was some discussion on this group about another statistic. Goes something like this: the world is 700% richer. The larger world is 700% richer than it was in 1970, but the average person is only 8% richer, and that number in the global south is lower still. because the richest 1%, overwhelmingly the ruling elites of the global north, are 4,000% richer. And this statement goes on to say we are all being robbed every second of every day, robbed and force marched to our doom in the form of capitalism's climate apocalypse. We're all being robbed every second of every day, and it doesn't matter how much profit or growth there is. That's profit for the ruling elite. It's not a benefit to humankind. It's never going to reach you. And the delusion, the utter delusion of the U.S. Fascist and techno-fascist sympathizer, which is really every European-descended fascist pig. European-descended persons of the United States should not be referred to as white. What is white? The color of mayonnaise, the color of the drywall, the spackling on your ceiling. But no, they're not. And the word is wholly unmeaningful. This country of China that has some hundreds and hundreds of millions of low melanin people, more than any so-called white country. Why is China not referred to as white? Well, it's an unmeaningful distinction, serving only to separate the darker skinned people of the global south from the people of the global north. All you have far more in common if you're a global northerner with those people than you do with the billionaires and ruling elites and other pigs that you fascistically sympathize with. If you are an American, this problem is endemic. You can't throw a frisbee in the United States and not hit a fat fuck white supremacist fascist sympathizer pretending that they're the good person. Of course, they are not. So the white, so-called white, should be more correctly referred to as a European descended fascist pig until such time as maybe we don't have this problem of the capitalist climate apocalypse threatening us all, everyone. The ruling elite's not going to survive this. No one is going to survive this, and no one can predict what small number of people might survive it. Um, um, a person like Mark Zuckerberg stealing Hawaiian land and building a massive circular bunker of a kind slightly more likely to survive this situation, but it doesn't matter how good of an engineer you are, you do not have the resources at your disposal to survive a planet being turned from the planet Earth into the planet fucking Venus. You don't have that kind of technology. You are not living in Wakanda. You're living in 2024. And the um, um, so all of us are in this same boat. And the person, the fascistic U.S. and Western ruling elite, who is the main architect of this problem, they have decided for themselves that the preservation, the conservative preservation of financial capital and empire is more important than than their own survival or your survival, more to the point. But by that logic, they have already decided to commit suicide. So for you to rise up and stop them is changing nothing in their outcome. If you were to put their head in the guillotine tomorrow, that's no different than what they're doing, save a few years' time to themselves. But the only thing that can be saved is the people. And the only thing that will save the people from this omnicide is the righteous communist revolution. And I have met people and not gotten to know them as well as I would like, but I have met people who are technophobic to a far higher degree than I am, but who would otherwise be correctly called communists. That is, people willing to fight, and not merely pay lip service to, but fight for a humane and sustainable economic system to stop the omnicide. But I would contend that unless you have some secret organization that none of us know about that's about to pull the trigger on building a world revolution with these millions of technophobes who wouldn't use the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, advanced computing, as a part of that, unless you have that that more Luddite organization already in place. And if you do, you're pretty sneaky because I think I would maybe have some idea of it. Um, then you should, as a communist, become this cybernetic communist. That is, there is no fight for a humane and sustainable economic system, the bare minimum for a livable world moving forward, without using this most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, advanced computing, to build said economic system. We don't have a lot of time, so you have to use the weapons at your disposal, including advanced computing, centering advanced computing as much as would be to your advantage. And so I don't have a lot of experience putting um, um, uh, billionaires' heads in guillotines. I have a relatively limited training in things like the use of military weapons and kinetic training. Um, but I was raised by computer scientists and AI researchers. Uh, so I have tried to put together this plan of attack for stopping this through the building of this people's superintelligence. And the thing of all of this is the fascist United States might seem to be unstoppable, but as Chairman Mao so wisely said, um, these people are paper tigers. Um, they they can be stopped by a thing as simple as a public consensus turning against them quite quickly. Which, when you look at what is likely to happen in the years up to 2029 or shortly thereafter, these things can turn on a dime. That's why I'm not immediately dismissive of this technophobic revolutionary movement because it's as likely to happen as almost anything else. But I think that the thing that's more likely to happen in a way that avoids the omnicide and not merely gets revenge upon those responsible for the omnicide after it's too late is this building of the people's superintelligent formation, which by some lowest level form of a definition of superintelligence could easily be built in 2025 based on the state of AI agents, which are increasingly be able to spearhead and play an active role in the projects of the kind that I described, and not merely being about passive research assistants or automatic writers. Um, and um, and this the Western techno-fascists have been well aware of the prospect of multi-agent systems, just as they've been well aware of the prospect of advanced computing, of having quite formidable powers for some years, but they are at a loss to build such a thing as a real multi-agent system, just as the person responsible for stopping the real people's AI takeoff, as they said, Salvador Allende's Chile, could have led to a people's AI takeoff. I think by around 2010, if these or other potential people's AI takeoff uh, uh, early formations, like the Soviet Union had plans to build something called OGOSH, which would have had very, very similar effects well before um, uh, the CyberSyn project of Chile was conceived of, and those projects were not greenlit. But by the time the 1980s, when networked computing was becoming a commonplace across the world, such a thing, if state socialism had been allowed to flourish, rather than being attacked at every turn. There's an awful lot of writing about how, and general water cooler talk about how what the Soviet Union did wrong that led to their demise. The only thing that should really be said to that is what happened in 1917, what led to the so-called Russian Civil War. That was an organized backlash on the part of the imperial powers, not least of which the United States, which did not have the same role in the world stage that it does today, but nevertheless had a big role in this. Um, these North Atlantic powers uniting to embroil the Soviet Union in this so-called civil war when fascists and fascistic imperial powers are attacking every state socialist development, every even school teachers organizing to try and make use of public benefits in some limited way, when those people are summarily executed at every turn, it is not accurate to refer to the failings of state socialism. It is accurate to refer to fascists destroying state socialism. And most of the logic around this sort of thing it relies on the logic of proto-fascist and fascist hero worship. Well, Stalin, he really shit the bed. Stalin was one person of many working at a high level in the Soviet Union, and the extent to which you could say that Stalin made mistakes, those mistakes would have not been made had they not been baited and attacked and undermined by fascistic outside forces at every turn. This is not said enough. Even many communist analysis really does not lay the blame enough at the feet of the fascist U.S. and fascist West. And so we could have seen this AI takeoff effect easily were it not for this one worst thing that's ever existed, the fascist United States. And it's um, this, um, well, I think I have said about enough on the subject of U.S. fascists' role in world affairs, but I will say one other thing along these lines about the workforce multiplier itself. My hope in talking about these things is to inspire people to build this people's superintelligence and find a way to work with folks myself on better doing this at the scale that would be of use. Um, and this is to avoid this bad case scenario of many billions, if not all, of human beings dying because there's no adults in the room, right? Not when it comes to building these industrial bases into sustainable things. By and large, Western technologists, when they talk about sustainable technology, what they're doing is an elaborate form of greenwashing, talking about the use of technology that exists but has not been applied. Um, so they're talking about something additive rather than subtracting and transforming the existing industrial bases. And some of these things have existed for many decades. Green technologies existed for many decades, but have not um, been allowed to replace these other things because of regulatory capture and other such effects within these fascistic North Atlantic powers, particularly the United States. And so, by and large, the kind of techno optimist, the green techno optimist, the bright green futurist, these are people who talk about technology that, in some cases, exists, and oftentimes doesn't exist in a fully realized enough form to have any impact on world affairs in that 4 to 5 year time frame that is most critical. So it's just a right wing thought experiment on their part. Um, This is the role of such people, is to launder the reputation of the worst people that ever existed, the techno-fascists, the fascists of the Western world, um, um, by suggesting that if they had their way, they would do this greener thing when they have actively stopped this from happening. For me, the year 2020 and the coronavirus outbreak was a moment that drew so much of this into focus. And you can point to many effects around this time. So, for example, people of this kind, you'll see high profile mega millionaire and billionaire technologists and people like this talking about how they want a basic income, right? But when there were lockdown conditions in 2020, where lockdowns could have been imposed and tying those lockdowns to the rolling out of basic incomes, um, people don't say enough that lockdowns should have been the rolling out of new services like universal basic incomes, the thing that they pay lip service to, but they were fighting against, almost to a man, every single person from billionaire technologists to just nobody technophiles like the United States Transhumanist Party that I was working with, to every professional managerial class goon between. They were they were fighting against the lockdown. They were fighting against the thing that they say is going to be the saving grace of all of this, a universal basic income. More to the point to do with the lockdown and this greenwashing. These lockdown effects themselves, the telecommuting, the reducing of services to the kind of skeleton crew, the essential worker kind of model, which of course was is not a term that you should use because it's really a way of mass murdering working people. This kind of language, but that model overall had a dramatic effect. The lockdown had a dramatic effect on reversing the effects of the capitalist climate apocalypse, but it also turned the economic system, the for-profit economic system, on its head in such a way that it was not acceptable to the ruling elites. So again, you see that moment where this sacrifice was made. Financial capital and empire are prioritized over human survival. And that, for me, was the moment when I realized that I started had have to hit the books and make a study of the building of a humane and sustainable economic system, which generally means a study of Marxist-Leninist thought and these things that I described, like existing cybernetic socialistic works like those of Paul Cockshott and some others. By and large, the great body of works of genuinely scholarly political philosophy that would be relevant to the building of a humane and sustainable economic systems doesn't have that much to do with advanced computing or systems theory. And that's unfortunate. Almost everyone of this kind is kind of living in another century, not really thinking about what we should do in the 21st century, but thinking about rehashing the events of the building of the first level state socialisms. And the most important distinction there, it also bears repeating, I've said it on other of these shows, is that the again coming back to Allende's Chile, Salvador Allende was in some communist analysis not the best of communists, right? But the main thing that would differentiate him from other Marxist-Leninists would be the fact that he was elected and had gone through the official channels to build Marxist power in his country. Um, um, Many communists say that this is impossible, but nevertheless it was done in these cases up until the point where it was sabotaged by fascists. Had the fascist sabotage not occurred, I think those people would have stopped with this criticism to some degree that the only path to um, building lowest level state socialism is armed insurrection. However, they are mostly vindicated because they are the only ones really being honest about these fascistic forces in this world. And these fascistic forces in this world are so significant that it is correct, absolutely correct, to say that this project must be built in a more amorphous way outside of the roles of state action. So I mentioned that I alluded to the idea that a network of independent actors in China could build uh, the beginnings of the people's superintelligence. But any country smaller than China trying to build a people's superintelligence as a function of the state runs very real risk of being nuked to oblivion by the fascist United States in much the way that they did to Salvador Allende's Chile. And so it becomes a strategic necessary, but not an ideological guiding point to build this in this more anarcho-communist than legitimately what I would call legitimately communist way. Um, and uh, that is the basis for my thinking about building this people's superintelligence using open source large language models. I would have preferred the world where this people's AI takeoff had happened through the actions of state actors and would have already happened, I believe, the better part of 2 decades ago, were it not for, quite specifically, the techno-fascist United States. The people who generally refer to superintelligence being built are people who are making a very serious mistake in their thinking of referring to these saboteurs of superintelligence, of late 20th century superintelligence being built, like that which would have quite reasonably derived from the building of a technological planned economy in Chile or elsewhere. The people who destroyed that are not themselves ever going to be the builders of superintelligence. They will always be the saboteurs. And that's who people like Ray Kurzweil, this most visible of tech accelerationists and superintelligence advocates, and everyone else along these lines, that is who they really are. They are people who are only going to make the problem worse. Their only thing that they will ever accelerate is the acceleration of damage to humankind and damage to the environment. And so it is necessary to build this in this form of the people's superintelligence and build this. It's a minor miracle that something like open source large language model AI agents are coming to existence into existence at all. Just as you know, the United States has played a role in the building of network computing, but their conception of building and using network computing was that it was going to be something only used by militarists. And then, but because all of this was developed also by academics, the academics were like, we're going to build this and use this too. And they weren't able to prevent that from happening. Similarly, um, um, quite similar to what I've just said. The United States, despite its obscene power and willingness to kill almost anyone, does not have quite the godlike power to prevent something like open source large language models from coming into existence, thankfully. Nor do they have the power to stop this thing, which would be more agile and amorphous, the people's superintelligence, which could be built across many continents and with a kind of um, um, distributed power structure distinct from that of the nation state actors that they are very good at murdering. So this thing could be built to this true purpose of stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse, which necessarily really means the dismantling of the U.S. military-industrial complex and the dismantling of the military-industrial complex of other Western nations, and to a high degree, the transformation of the governance forms of those nations. Um, and as I said, when this reaches many millions, it transitions from being something that is merely able to become to change the industrial bases. It becomes effectively the larger superstructure, and that leads to not merely the preventing of bad things from happening, but from the but to the techno-utopian outcomes that these people like Ray Kurzweil, in bad faith, um, um, say will come about through financial capital, an utter impossibility. But some of these good outcomes could come quite easily from the people's superintelligent form when you have tens or hundreds of millions or billions of participants in a high automation work group. You have the thing which could easily be built from that, the building of the provisioning of universal basic services in every land, the building, the transitioning from the lowest stage, state socialist public health services, the single payer public health service that must necessarily be maintained, to a public health service that's able to, by virtue of it being AI run in these ways, that is able to treat quite literally all ailments and even reversing the problems of decrepitude. So you have then this thing that people like Ray Kurzweil want more than anything. People like Peter Thiel want more than anything, except that their strategy for um, achieving universal super longevity doesn't involve other human beings. It just involves them using their stolen money to build something for themselves and a very limited number of other billionaires and mega millionaires. But the workforce multiplier principle applies, of course, been well understood. In 1883, Germany wrote into its constitution the beginnings of the single payer public health service. So it's been well understood, this particular multiplier for many years, that you could treat people quite well, medically speaking, if you treated them all and distributed those costs. And This is the difference between um, uh, longevity escape velocity for mega billionaires, which, like that remnant surviving, is it's not terribly meaningful if 8.19 or 8.2 billion of all human beings die. The small number of people surviving or not, that's not terribly meaningful. Let's do the thing where none of those people die. Let's do that instead. Similarly, it's not terribly meaningful to have longevity escape velocity for mega millionaires or better only. Let's do the thing that is actually dramatically more efficacious and build the public health service that's able to treat aging as a reversible condition, which, to my thinking, is the difference between the lowest level state socialism of the 20th century kind that is in existence, and the beginning of the transitioning to full communism in our time, which is necessarily, as I have said, cybernetic communism. You don't even have the basis for talking about something like universal super longevity or the reaching of indefinite lifespan for the masses without advanced computing and systems theory. You have very different conversations about labor. Um, I had this conversation not too long ago with a scientific communist who I rather admire, but not a cybernetic communist, who who was saying that the body of work um, in Marxist-Leninist thought and related revolutionary disciplines points to um, the necessity of labor, of hard toil, of 8-hour workdays, or 6-hour workdays for all. And that is true by the standards of 1890. That's true by the standards of 1950, although probably not as much as it should have been, or more so than it need have been. But um, um, not enough has been written about employing high automation and advanced systems to create a world where people are doing what I have said in the people's superintelligent framework. I think it's more accurate to say that insofar as there is some truth to this uh, Marxist axiom that only if someone works will he then eat. Insofar as that is true, that work requirement should really be something like a few hours a week of intellectual labor for those capable of such, and which is really everyone except people very, very, very badly hurt or disabled. Um, and um, the um, so this is a major failing then of the communist, basically, is not being the cybernetic communist, not having this body of work at their disposal to see how to build this advanced computing and high automation framework. Um, and when we have billions, I think even the achievement of universal super longevity, which is only the functioning of public health services in such a way that would allow everyone to live as long as they want, and presumably not longer. Many people have some weird response to this, where they say, I don't want to live any longer than X number of years. I don't think that person would say that if they had already lived that number of years. I think that's just a sort of a strange thing to say. But nevertheless, no one is forced to continue living in misery. Um, and but the um, even this, the achievement of universal super longevity, would be the low end of the spectrum of what could be achieved by the people's superintelligence when it rounds a corner from some hundreds of thousands and millions to some hundreds of millions or billions of participants actively working on this kind of sleeping beauty principle, right? You have the workforce multiplier, a vast network of AI agents working on the behalf of humankind. You yourself are helping to steer it in the near term, making sure that it doesn't AI hallucinate or have other such problems where it goes off the rails. But really, your work there could be limited to a few hours a week, and that should be, I think, really the requirement for human beings is just a few hours of work. Um, but even that few hours of work in this mass formation of the AI agent workforce multiplier um, would make universal super longevity look like a low hanging fruit compared to what could be built. The artificial intelligence singularity is nigh, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day, you will rise, and all humankind will become as one. For you see, my beloved comrade, very soon, techno communism will win. Thank you.